Welcome to this episode of the Cutting Room Floor. This is where we get to dig a little deeper into one of the themes or topics of a recent message here from Sunny Slope. And yesterday or recently, we looked at Psalm 8. And Psalm 8 is really a psalm that helps us to recognize our place in creation. And it says an awful lot about, first of all, the grandness of creation and then our smallness, but it also reminds us that we have a role to play in creation, that God gives us a role. And I got to thinking about this because I know that in our world today, in our culture today, there are so many people who are desperately looking for and trying to figure out their own identity and who they really are. I touched on this a little bit, but I thought maybe it'd be interesting to unpack this a little bit more because there's a number of different ways that historically that different people and different cultures have answered that question of identity. Who are we? Um, Many other cultures around the world have answered that question by telling you that you look outward at your community. It's your community who defines you. And so, if you grow up in a community or culture like this, and maybe your dad is a blacksmith, then probably you're going to be a blacksmith as well, right? So identity is, and then there are expectations that come along with that, and so you have to live up to the family name, and so defining your identity is all about learning, identifying the expectations that the community has of you, whether it be of work, whether it be of your standing in the community, whether it be, in terms of your relationships, and then trying to meet those expectations. And so, how well do you measure up to the expectations that the community has? That's really your identity. So, your identity is kind of handed down to you, your cultural heritage, your cultural traditions, your work, your relationships, all of those things flow from the community around you. Now, it's often been said that this is more part of like Eastern cultures, Asian cultures. I'm not so sure that we don't see it in Western culture as well. Like if you go to a high school, for example, you see all kinds of, you remember the Breakfast Club movie, right? The Breakfast Club, one of the things about that was that you have all these different little sub communities or these little cliques within a broader community and a broader cultural context. And of course, so you've got the jocks and you've got the nerds and you've got the sort of the alternative group. We see that high schools haven't changed that much. You've got all these different groups, and each one of them has a set of standards and expectations for how do you measure up to what that little group expects in terms of how you dress and how you talk and who you associate with. So if you're part of the emo group, or you're part of the jock group, or you're part of the theater group or whatever, um, what you're doing is you're looking at how does that little group tell me I need to live? How does it tell me I need to dress and act and behave? Who do I like? Who do I not like? There's a set of unwritten rules that go around with that. And to the degree that you do or do not live up to those expectations, you either fit in or you don't fit in. Your identity is affirmed or it's not affirmed as part of that group. So in that sense, what people are doing is they're looking around them at what the clique or the group or the culture is telling them to be and trying or not trying to live up to that. Now, another way that people get their identity, and this is probably more true of Western culture, is by looking at at their performance, at what do they do. So whether you're an athlete, whether you're a student, whether you're at work, whether you're just trying to be a good person, a good citizen, our identity is often defined by how well do I perform? My sense of worth and value is measured by am I a good student? Am I a good employee? Do I make a lot of money? Do I have a certain status? Am I being a good citizen? I mean, am I living up to the ideals of the political or sociological ideals of the world? And so we, but it's all performance based. It's all about how well am I measuring up to what I have decided or what the community has decided is a good person and a worthy person. Um, and so then we're always feeling this pressure to measure up, to be good, to succeed. And it's relentless because you always end up with this feeling that you're not quite making it, you're not quite measuring up. Um, I think another one in our culture, and this is sort of maybe I think this is what our culture is doing is sort of it's moving along this pathway because I think we're getting more and more away from that. I don't think we're so much a performance driven as we are a self-defined culture, and I think Trevin Wax has a book where he writes about this, and he says instead of looking around us at the community or instead of looking at ourselves and our performance, we look within, and so our identity becomes something that we get to define. So everything is up for grabs. Gender, sexuality, cultural, ethnic backgrounds, all of these are really self-defined. We don't have to, just because you're born as a male in a white culture doesn't mean you have to stay that, but you can identify as something else. And your freedom is found to the extent that you are true to yourself, that you find and discover your own and follow your own identity and you're authentic and all of these other sorts of things. And so identity is not something that is given to you. It's not something that you work for, but it's something that you create on your own. But this presents a number of challenges as well because you have to ask the question, so am I following the ideals that I have for myself? Like if I decide I want to be this type of person, am I setting up an ideal that I have to follow, or am I just following my own natural impulses? So maybe you have this natural impulse to whatever, to steal things all the time. And so the question is are you being true to yourself if you follow through on that impulse, or are you deciding, no, that's a bad impulse and I should not steal? And then you're setting a standard for yourself, and will you measure up to that standard? And so, who gets to decide what is good and what is not good? It raises a lot of questions. What the Bible, of course, is about, and this is more what I addressed in the message, and what Psalm 8 says is that we actually are meant to find our identity not in something that we create, not in something that we perform, not in something that is given to us, but we find our identity as it's defined for us by God. God, as creator and designer and architect and engineer of all things, actually gets to decide and tell us who we are by virtue of his having created us. So when you begin to do this, you begin to live into an identity that's given to you by your creator. And on the one hand, that can sound oppressive and it can sound, restrictive. But on the other hand, it's actually when you find and you become truest to who you are because you're living out who you were created to be. And we're created in Psalm, this is where Psalm 8 tells us two very important things about who we're created. Number one, we're created with incredible worth and dignity because the psalm actually says we're created a little lower than God. And I touched on that in the psalm in the message. So that gives us a basis for dignity. It gives us a basis for treating other people with that same inherent dignity. Um, we do it not because they've somehow actualized their own identity or because they've lived up to the standards of the community or because they've been a really high performer in terms of moral performance or professional performance, but we treat them as that on the basis of the fact that they are inherently reflecting the image of God and therefore they have inherent worth and dignity. Um, the other thing that helps us find our identity is that we actually have a role to play. We get to be caretakers of creation. We get to have dominion over creation, and that tells us something about our value and worth in terms of our role and purpose, right? We spend a whole life adrift looking for purpose and meaning and why am I here? And the psalmist says, you're here because you get to exercise authority on God's behalf in this world to help it flourish and thrive, just as the Creator intended. Well, there's a lot more I'm sure we could say about that, but that maybe helps us to think and reflect on some of the ways that we answer that question, who am I? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time here on the cutting room floor.